What's Genesis chapter 10 known for? You Bible scholars. Colin, I've got an echo up here. Seems to be really hot. Anybody? I'm sorry? It comes right after chapter 9, right? This is the table of nations. Who settled where the nations came from. So it's going to be some genealogies. It's might seem dry, but when we look at, you remember what's the theme of Genesis is the bloodline of that Savior that's going to come, that was promised right after the fall. Remember, God was talking to the serpent in chapter 3, verse 15, saying, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, or crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And of course, what happened when Jesus came? Jesus crushed Satan's head, and yeah, it hurt Jesus. He got nipped in the heel. It wasn't a deadly wound to Jesus, but it was a deadly wound to Satan. And so way back from the beginning, we have the first prophecy of Jesus coming, and it's back in chapter 3 of Genesis. So we're looking at where people settled, where the nations came from, but you'll see, as we do chapters 10 and 11 today, that we stay focused on that bloodline of the Messiah that's going to come. The key to chapter 10 is in verse 32, where it says, These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Now remember, when we started the book of Genesis, we concluded that if you can believe chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth, and if you can believe that God could do that, and all the galaxies and the whole universe, the rest of the book is easy to believe. And we're going to look at some interesting stuff, the Tower of Babel today. And did these people really go out and form all the nations? Well, if you can believe chapter 1 of Genesis, why can't you believe chapter 10? So let's pick it up in chapter 10, verse 1. Now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. So from these three sons, God's going to repopulate the whole world. And as we look at each son and their genealogy, we're going to see the following detail. And if you would put up slide 1, that I don't know if you guys are going to even be able to read. I'm sorry, I made the font too small. But there's the three sons and their descendants. I'll talk about it as we go through it as well. Now, you'll notice the little red line there. You can see that probably. This is the bloodline of Jesus Christ, of the Messiah. Here's Abram, who's going to become Abraham. So we have Noah, comes through Shem. So keep that in mind as we study today. Verse 2, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. Let's see, I think I have another slide for Japheth up there. So there's his sons across the top. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rippoth, and if anybody wants to try to pronounce these for me, you're welcome, come on up. Togarma. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. I can't go fast, so I have to stop and phonetically try to do this. From these coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. So you can see from this chart of Japheth that he's credited really with settling the Indo-European peoples, from India to the shores of Western Europe. Gomer became the first Germanic peoples, including the French, Spanish, and Celtic settlers. His sons, Ashkenaz and Togarma, settled north of Judea and Armenia. Magog, Tubal, and Meshech. Have you heard Magog before? Where do we hear that? Gog and Magog, Ezekiel chapter 38. Okay. These guys settled east of Eastern Europe. They settled in Russia and that sort of northeast region. Madai, I guess you'd say, it became the ancient Medes, populating what's now Iran and Iraq, and he also populated India. Javan became the ancient Greeks. So there's, and I wrote in red the countries that they settled. So maybe I'll print that out and have it for you guys next time if you're interested. Can you read that at all? Yeah? The front few rows are saying yeah. Back rows are going like this. Let's look at Ham. Verse 6. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabata, Ramah, and Sabtecha. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. So do we have a slide for Ham up there? Oh, you're good. Thank you, Carol. So, I'm sorry, you guys, I put it in green. So we've got Nimrod. Here's Cush. He did Ethiopia. Nimrod, Babylon, Nineveh, and Rezin. And onwards. Havilah, Arabia. The Sabaeans from Sabata. Anything else? This guy, Casluhim, were the Philistines. Now Canaan. What's interesting about Canaan? Remember, he's the one that had the curse. They settled what is modern day Israel. And of course, when Moses and Joshua came back, and they drove out all the Canaanites from the land because they were evil. They were sacrificing their kids to the god Molech. And so here we have Canaan and all of the the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and the Mosquitoites and all those ites up here. The Phoenicians and also Sinite, they believe, formed the Chinese. Verse 8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar, which, by the way, would be Iraq, Babylon. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Reboth, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is, its principal city. So this guy's worthy of note. He's not of the bloodline of the Messiah, but we have special mention of him because he was, it says, a mighty hunter. Now this is not a compliment. It wasn't that he was a great elk hunter and knew how to do elk calls. He was a hunter, really, of men. He was a warrior, a conqueror. And he ruled over the city of Babel, which was the first organized rebellion against God, human organized rebellion against God. Jewish legend says that Nimrod's undertakings produced the effect that man trusted in his own power and ability instead of remaining dependent on God. Now think of that for a minute. Does that still go on today? We're really good at relying on ourselves. I better intervene. I better do something because God may not act. I better do it. We tend to, it's logical, worldly thinking. It's good for us to be dependent upon God. And so here, right after the flood, all these miracles, you see mankind setting God aside and wanting to depend on themselves. And Nimrod is leading this by conquering. Verse 13, Mizraim begot Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Parthruism, and Cashluhim. I'm butchering these names, I realize it. From whom came the Philistines and Captorim. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. Now, I said Canaan settled in what's modern-day Israel, and they settled also to the north of Israel. Now, we have some cities just north of Israel in what would be Lebanon today, like Tyre, which was, remember, that was the ocean city, and then the next one up was Sidon. We have Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, and the Zamorite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the family of the Canaanites were dispersed, And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, which if we look on the map here, it's probably up about here on the coast. Okay, so the border from Sidon, as you go towards Gerar, as far as Gaza. Then as you go towards Sodom, Gomorrah, we know those two towns. Here's the Dead Sea. We know a professor that believes he's found the real old Sodom right there. He was looking at it from up on the hills and they saw a pile of dirt, and went down, and they're excavating it now. So there's Sodom and Gomorrah. You've got the Gaza down here. So their region was from way up here down to Gaza over to all of what's modern day Israel. Verse 20, these were the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands and in their nations. Verse 21, and children were born also to Shem. So now we're looking at the descendants of Shem. The father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, and he was the father of the Persian peoples. Asher, he was the father of the Assyrians. Here's a good name for a new baby, Arpachshad. How do you say that? Give me your best shot, everybody together. Oh, great. Lud, I can do Lud. That name is a lot easier for me. Lud was the father of the Lydians in Asia Minor, and Aram the father of the Armenians and Syrians. The sons of Aram were Uz. Job came from the land of Uz. Hul, Gether, and Mash, that funny name again, begot Selah, and Selah begot Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. Well, what does that mean? In his days the earth was divided. This could refer, this is a guess, to the divisions that occurred after the Tower of Babel, when God confused man's language. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begot Almodad, Selaph, I'll let you read those names, whole bunch of them, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Oh, Jobab, we think, was Job of the Bible. So Job lived in Ur, and we have his name here listed. Job is the oldest book, we believe, in the Bible. All these were sons of Joktan, and their dwelling place was from Misha as you go toward Sephar, the mountain of the east. These were the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. There we go. What a brief paragraph, or few paragraphs, describing how the earth was populated after the flood. Is it possible that this is true? Yeah. As we're going to go and look at Babel, the Tower of Babel, and they found remnants of it. But as we see the table of nations here in chapter 10, why is that valuable to us? Well, for example, Ezekiel 38. Gog of Magog. Well, the region he's talking about is that original region where Magog settled. So if we want to know what nation is that he's talking about, we go back here. That's what the Bible's referring to, is these guys. We don't quite know exactly. We're guessing that some of these guys settled in Germany or this region, but we have the general area. And so it helps us to understand biblical prophecy, many things in the Old Testament, if we understand the disbursement of this table of nations, as we call it. Also, when Joshua drives out the people in the land of Canaan, it seems kind of cruel, but we know why. Because we have this background in the Bible. We had God saying, look, at these people are going to become evil in this region. We have later in Genesis where God tells Abraham, these people's iniquity has not become full yet. You're going to go down to Egypt for 400 years, and when you come back and their iniquity has become full, we'll drive them out of the land. So it helps us to understand some of the rest of the story on these events in the Bible. Let's go to chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Okay, if you get off the ark You got the three families, and you got Noah. Of course you're going to speak the same language, aren't you? And your kids are going to speak the same language. It makes sense. It came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." If you accept the biblical account of creation and the flood, the Tower of Babel occurred only about 250 years after the flood. Earth's population would have been somewhere between about 2,000 and maybe 10,000 people. Not that huge. So again, I can see that a single language would be reasonable. There might have been some that had a southern accent or a New York accent, but it's the same language. It came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Well, let's see. What's the next slide you have? Here you go. This will work. Mount Ararat is right there, or the mountains of Ararat. Babylon is right here. This is the land of Shinar. So they traveled all the way from Ararat to the land of Shinar. Not that huge of a deal. Probably not as far as here to Boise. That's how far mankind traveled. Remember God's instructions back in chapter 9, verse 1? Be fruitful, be industrious, multiply, have kids, and fill the earth. That means spread out. These guys didn't spread out. They all went together to the land of Shinar. They weren't really following God's instructions. They were building a city. God didn't say go build a city. He said spread out. Agriculture. If you're out there farming, who are you dependent upon? I wonder if it's going to rain this month. Planted all that seed. Lord, please bring rain. You're dependent upon God. When you build a city, you're dependent upon man. You're dependent upon each other. And look what they said in verse 3. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens." So they're building a tower with the top in the heavens. It's like, let's build our own way to God. Instead of our relationship with God and Him coming to us and enabling us, let's build our own. Let's build ourselves a city so we can be self-reliant. Let's make a name for ourselves. That's the pride of life, isn't it? Lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth and repopulate the earth like God told us to. Let's stick together instead. Rely on each other. They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. In other words, they had technology. And when we have our technology, it's okay, God, I've got it. I've got this one. I've got my technology. I don't necessarily need you. They're self-reliant. Now, is this myth or did this really happen? Interestingly, the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC wrote that the Tower of Babel still stood in his day and that he had seen it. I believe the guy. Verse 5, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." What God is saying here is man's capacity to be a creep is enormous. Look at why did the flood come? Everything in his heart was continually evil. And so he's looking at man now after the flood, after he dealt with things, they're doing the same thing again. They're rebelling against God, they're dependent upon themselves, rejecting God, and he's saying they can communicate easily. I've got to do something to interrupt this. He could have killed the whole earth again, but no, he's gracious. He doesn't do that. He says in verse 7, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." Notice the us in there? There's another little road sign pointing at the Trinity. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth. Looks like he's getting done what he had intended in the first place. And they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So God's method of intervention here, instead of flooding again, which he promised he wouldn't do, is he makes it difficult for man to communicate. They can't collude. There's a wonderful word today. They can't conspire together and pursue this evil. So the Lord scatters them abroad. That's not judgment against man, scattering them abroad. It's more like mercy. I've asked you to go do this. You're not doing it. Now I'm going to guide your steps and accomplish my purpose. And think of it. Put yourself there. You've got this guy Nimrod. He's kind of brutal. He's conquered the peoples. He set up the city. He's the ruler of the city. And then you're forced to leave. Where are you going to go? You and your family, you're going? I mean, what's out there? It's wild. Animals are repopulating. You're out there in the wilds. I guess we better try to plant and garden and come up with a crop. You're going to develop your own culture as your family grows. You're even as you go, some went to China, some went to Northern Europe, some went down into Africa. As they spread out, you're even going to have your physical characteristics change as you adapt to the climate. We call that microevolution. Yeah, that happens. If you get sunburnt like a peach or a tomato in 10 minutes of sun and you went down to Africa, you're probably not going to survive. But your brother who has that olive skin probably will. The most significant point here is that man is again becoming dependent upon God for rain in its season and good crops. Verse 10. This is the genealogy of Shem. Do I have a slide for that? I forget. Maybe I don't. Oh, that one will work. Hey, wait a minute. Didn't we already do this? Why are we looking at the genealogy of Shem again, do you think? He's the bloodline of the Messiah. We're returning to look again at the bloodline of the Messiah. Now here's Shem. It goes down here, but as we go through this chapter or this paragraph, we ignore Joktan and all of these guys. Even though, look at how many more kids he had. We're going to go this way and go to Abraham. So we're focusing on the Messianic bloodline again. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Selah. After he begot Selah, Arphaxad lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters. Selah lived 30 years and begot Eber. After he begot Eber, Selah lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters. Eber lived 34 years and begot Peleg. After he begot Peleg, Eber lived 430 years and begot sons and daughters. Peleg lived 30 years and begot Reu. After he begot Reu, Peleg lived 209 years and begot sons and daughters. Reu lived 32 years and begot Serug. After he begot Serug, Reu lived 207 years and begot sons and daughters. Serug lived 30 years and begot Nahor. After he begot Nahor, Serug lived 200 years. Notice how the years are getting less and less? I wonder, is that because the environment changed after the flood? Noah lived all those years in maybe a high oxygen, high air pressure environment with the mantle of clouds and just a healthy body and living hundreds and hundreds of years. And then after the flood, when the climate changed and they're getting sunburnt and maybe the oxygen level is reduced, we don't know. But the climate definitely changed, and we're watching the years get less and less. Perhaps the climate continued to change over the centuries right after the flood. Verse 24, Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. After he begot Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Abram meaning exalted father. His name's going to be changed later to Abraham, which is father of a multitude. He's one of the most significant people really in Genesis. If you think of the book of Genesis, it spanned more than 2,000 years. About 1/3 of it relates to Abraham. Isn't that interesting? He's an important guy in the book of Genesis. Verse 27, this is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Ishkah. But Sarai was barren, and she had no child. So you have 3 brothers, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. But Haran, he has a son, Lot, and then he dies. So if you're Lot, who do you have in your life? He probably hung out with Uncle Abram, Uncle Nahor, and Granddad Terah. Oddly, Uncle Nahor marries his niece, Milcah, who's also Lot's sister. So there's the family dynamics. And they lived in the land of the Chaldeans, it says, which would be southern Iraq. Go back to that map if you would, Carol. Here is where Ur is. Okay? This is Iraq, of course. There's Israel over there. And so you've got Kuwait down here. The Chaldeans lived in this southern region. If you remember that, even when we look at King Nebuchadnezzar, he was from the Chaldeans. And all of this became one big nation, Babylon, modern-day Iraq now. And they're going to travel from here up to Haran, which is up there. And they found the ruins of Haran. I'll show you a photo in a minute. Did I do something? Go to the next one. They're laughing at me. That's all right. Laughter's good. There you go. There's the ruins of the city. Next one. That's restored, what they think it looked like. Kind of cool, huh? Think of how old this is. The actual foundations are there. These guys, this isn't myth. We're reading historical narrative in Genesis. Verse 31, you can leave that one up there. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, one thing, Carol and I were talking about this photo, and the one behind it, I'm not sure, but do you think maybe it was greener back then? This looks dry and barren. Back in those days, I bet it was lush. They know the earth was much greener. The whole Mediterranean was green with forests, and it's much drier now. So I can only guess what it must have been like back then. But that's the end of chapter 11, and we are set up now to begin looking at Abram, just the beginning of the Israelites. We're going to see next time where God calls Abram to go to a land that I will show you. And he does. He's like us. He kind of, well, maybe I'll go here first, and I'm supposed to leave my family and go, but maybe I'll take a long lot. And, you know, he's not perfect. And I'm really encouraged as we look at all these families in the Old Testament, they're dysfunctional. They're kind of wacko, and that gives me hope. God uses the imperfect to accomplish his will. And he's chosen all of us imperfect people, and he's made us clean. He's restored us into fellowship with him. It's pretty cool. But we'll stop there. It's a beautiful sunny day. We're stopping early. Amen.